International. And I think a lot of people know me as, just this professional face, the executive director. I run the show. It's a fun time, but it's not exactly, super glamorous. But I wanted to talk a little bit about my story, about how I got here, about how I became pro-life. I don't know if a lot of people know this, because they just know me as this professional face. So I really wanted to, share this story, not only so people know, but so they can, be strengthened by it. So first of all, I wanted to start and say right off the bat, there's a trigger warning. I know this is actually really sensitive material for me to talk about. So I'm going to be talking about rape, I'm going to be talking about domestic violence, I'm going to be talking about death threats, I'm of course going to be talking about abortion. So if it's something that's sensitive to you, be aware and, be sensitive with yourself and be gentle. I know there are times when I actually have to not tell this story at talks if I'm having a rough time, so I understand. So I'm just going to wait one more minute to see if we can get some more folks on watching the video. But yeah, this all started back when I was in high school. I grew up in California, and in California, right, everyone is liberal, at least that's the trope, right? But it's really pretty true, honestly. I was brought up in a Catholic household. We didn't really ever talk about abortion, and we didn't really talk about sex at all. So, the idea of talking about abortion was just something that didn't really happen. So by the time I hit high school, I knew I was queer. I was in a lot of on-again, off-again relationships with folks. And by the time I hit 16, I was I'm not Catholic anymore. I don't believe in anything. I called myself an atheist, and I, proudly stood by that. I had left behind the morals and the ideals that my parents had taught me. And I think that's really more the point, rather than, leaving behind a faith or whatever. It's just my parents were telling me to be responsible about things, and I wasn't. So I ended up in this really awful relationship at 15, where for months we were on again, off again. It was a really bad situation where I was doing everything possible to try to, be the girl that this guy wanted me to be. And it was just really bad, what I was doing to, degrade myself for his desires. And he would just consistently, do really, I want to say sketchy, but it was just abusive tactics, right? Things like gaslighting, cheating on me, calling me names and things like that. But I wanted nothing more than to be with this guy. So when I turned 16, we started sleeping together, and it was consensual at the time. Not a huge issue. We had, of course, had been fooling around for months before that, but about a month into us sleeping together, I told him that I was no longer comfortable doing that, and I was like, hey, can we please maybe not anymore? I'm not comfortable with this. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. Can we just not? And His response was to break up with me. If we weren't going to be sleeping together, then we couldn't be together as a couple. I should have known then and there that it was a bad thing. He was using me. He was being very utilitarian about me, and didn't want me in a relationship if I couldn't give him what he wanted sexually. But we stayed friends because that's the kind of person that I am. And I want to say it was Valentine's Day. So I was 16, Valentine's Day, and he raped me that day. I don't really want to get into details, but I told him no, and he continued. It was an awful and traumatic experience, and I was crying. It was a mess. Sorry, it's a little hard. So Valentine's Day is always hard for me now. Anyway, so March comes and goes, April comes. I haven't had a period in months. And I think I'm pregnant, right? It's been months since I've had a period. I'm putting on weight. I am hungry all the time, but I'm also feeling nauseous all the time. Everything is awful. My friends are picking up that something isn't quite right. My parents are picking up that something isn't quite right. My friends start talking and rumors start going around. Excuse me. That I think I'm pregnant. And it was probably mid-April when the guy found out, and of course, he and I are not on good terms. We haven't really talked since February. Of course, after the rape, you don't really want to talk to your rapist. But one day he comes and pulls me out of class, and he says, "Aimee, we need to talk." And I'm like, okay, you pulled me out of class. What do you want? I'm absolutely furious with him that he would come and pull me out of class, especially after everything that had happened, right? And he says to me, "Aimee, if you you need to get an abortion. If you're pregnant, you need to get an abortion. I'll take you, I'll pay for it, but you need to get it taken care of, and it needs to happen, now." And I'm just baffled. I'm like, what's the deal? I don't understand. The thing is, I was liberal, right? Growing up in California, I'm pro-choice. And I had been considering abortion up until that very moment, right? Abortion was the only thing on my mind for weeks. And he said, "Well, you need to get an abortion because I can't tell my mom about what happened." That was the reason. He didn't want to tell his mom. So I'm just standing there slack-jawed, my mouth is on the floor, it feels like. And he says, "Aimee, if you don't get an abortion, I might kill you. And then myself." And me, I'd been considering abortion. I was, half ready to jump on the table and be I don't want to ruin my life. I was 16, right? I was top of my class. And I was terrified. And when he said, "I'm going to kill you," if you don't get an abortion, suddenly everything clicked. Like, the world came into focus and I understood. What he was saying to me was, you're an inconvenience to me, you're an inconvenience to my future, therefore I'm going to kill you. And I realized that I couldn't be like him, that he was threatening violence because of an inconvenience in his life. So what right did I have to perpetuate the same cycle of violence against an innocent preborn child? You know, I had just taken 9th grade biology. I guess for most people it was 10th grade bio, but I took it in 9th grade. I had just taken it. I knew, right? I knew what was going on in the womb. I knew what embryology had to teach us, and yet up until that moment I had been deceiving myself. I'd been saying, like, pro-choice is fine, like, you know, it's not really a human. And then suddenly when my own life was threatened, I understood that the preborn child is a human, that the preborn child is just as human as me. You know, after months and months of abuse from this guy, I'm not going to name, you know, I probably should have gone to the police or the principal or my teacher or my parents or someone, but I didn't. I didn't tell anyone that I had been raped, and I didn't tell anyone about the death threats until college, until after college, actually. And there's something that I want to say, because it's something that I've been dealing with a lot in pro-life circles, is the unabashed support for Donald Trump, despite the things that he has said, like, grab him by the pussy. Excuse my language, not my language, his. Like, the support of Donald Trump in spite of all of that was extremely devastating to me. Like, when I heard those words out of our president's mouth from that recording, I suddenly was flashed back. Like, I was experiencing PTSD, like I was having panic attacks, because that was exactly what happened to me. Sorry, I'm like shaking right now. And I think that we, as pro-lifers, really need to own up to the fact that that's not okay. And it's not okay for pro-lifers to try to cover up or sweep that sort of thing under the rug. It's not pro-life for rape survivors like myself. Anyway, I know my story is not like massive and world-changing and earth-shattering or anything, but it's the reason why Rehumanize International is here today. Because at 16, I realized the humanity of the preborn child, and I realized how we're all interconnected, like how all of us share this intrinsic dignity as members of the human species. And I think it's something worth remembering. You know, even if it's hard for me to remember, because it's kind of my genesis, right? Anyway, so the story has been weird and strange, and yes, there is something wonderful in the fact that through the power of, the spirit of redemption, right? Like, we can take awful things and make good of them. And, that's what I'm trying to do with my own life, is through all the awfulness that happened when I was 16. I'm trying to make the world a better place for all of those that follow. So, one last thing. If you thought this story was powerful and worth sharing, please share it. And if you thought it was powerful enough that you want people in your life to hear it, then maybe consider bringing me to your school or your church or your community group, like whatever group it is that you work with to support this holistic cause for human rights. I do speaking engagements all the time. My fall semester is actually filling up quite fast, so I would love to join you at your school and tell my story, or your community group or your church, and talk to your squad about the consistent life ethic or pro-life feminism, or how we address the commoditization of children, or how we really work for a holistic culture of life. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for sitting through the hard stuff with me. I hope that you'll remember this story and share it with people whenever... Oh, that's one other thing I really should mention. People scream at me a lot about what about rape? Number one, pro-choice people, please don't ever scream at someone, what about rape? You do not know who you're talking to. You do not know their history. And pro-lifers don't scream that either. I mean, don't anyone scream, what about rape? It's an extremely traumatic event in a lot of people's history. Probably more people than you think. But whenever people do ask me that, I have my own story to tell, and my own story about how our shared human dignity means that no matter the violence that was perpetrated against me by my rapist, it does not mean that violence is the answer to an unplanned pregnancy. So feel free to share, to talk. If you have your own story, regardless of whether or not there's violence involved in that story, feel free to share your pro-life story too. I think story and narrative are really important things for changing hearts and minds. So thanks for listening and for being with me tonight. I actually am going to go to another social justice oriented event in the city very soon. So I hope you all have a great evening.